Next up, for most producers, planting during the winter is a rarity. However, from the perspective of potential forage, winter may hold a good opportunity to make improvements to your pasture by implementing some alternative legume seeding options. Market Journal's Bill Dodd recently caught up with Nebraska Extension educator Ben Beckman to find out more.
When it comes to forage, the winter months are typically a time for using resources that we have on hand while making a game plan for the following growing season. On the other hand, if conditions are favorable, winter may be the perfect opportunity to consider interseeding legumes to improve pasture production.
Now, when we look at why we want to go out and put legumes into a pasture, there's kind of two big factors that play into that. One of them is legumes are going to be a higher quality forage for our animals. So when we're looking at, just what we're providing for that animal to eat, especially over the course of the year, a lot of times these interseeding legumes is going to work well. If we're looking at something like maybe a wet meadow in the sandhills or on the eastern side of the state where we have a lot of cool season grasses in those situations, those grasses are typically going to kind of slump off during the summer. And that legume is just another factor to carry that quality of forage through that midsummer slump and just maintain that quality throughout the grazing period. The other thing that we can have that drives that factor to put legumes into a pasture is the fact that legumes, fix their own nitrogen. If we do have a pasture that we're managing and that we normally supply nitrogen fertilizer for, because that biomass portion is going to be made up with some plant that's supplying its own nitrogen, the amount of fertilizer that we have to put over the entire pasture is going to be lessened. So we have a little bit of a benefit there when we look especially at that nitrogen fertilizer that we're not going to have to apply as much.
There are several factors you'll want to keep in mind when deciding where to plant. In this circumstance, an old real estate adage comes to mind. It's all about location, location, location.
When we're looking at getting legumes established in a pasture, the first thing that we kind of want to look at is any management considerations that we might have. If we've got a pasture that's got a lot of weed pressure in it already, legumes are going to be really sensitive to herbicides. So if we know that we're going to have to go out and do some spraying for something like leafy spurge or some thistles throughout the year, and we're just going to knock out those legumes that we just got established, it's probably not a good place to go out and do your interseeding. Another thing that we kind of have to look at is where we're going to get good germination rates. Legumes can be a little bit tricky sometimes, so we need to have proper pH. They're sensitive to phosphorus, so if we've got some pastures where we've done some soil testing in the past, we know that we fall within those ranges that legumes prefer. And then the last thing that we can kind of look at in just ideal locations to put some of these things into practice is, again, looking at what we can actually physically do and where that labor is going to be worth it. If we know that we've got a highly productive pasture, again, drilling might be an option. If we've got a pasture where we can't really, physically get a drill to, some of these other techniques that we're going to talk about might be the route that we can go to get some seed out there that we're not going to actually have to go and get equipment into that pasture where maybe the topography or something is preventing that.
Once you've established a pasture to begin interseeding, there are a few different options at your disposal when it comes to planting. Drilling will usually be your best bet. Unfortunately, winter doesn't always allow us the easiest path.
When we've got frozen ground, drilling's not an option if we can't get that drill in the ground, and that's going to be our number one option if we want to make sure we have good, germination. So that's one thing to consider. When we're looking at something, especially like frost seeding, we're actually using that freeze thaw action, that heaving of the soil to get seed from the soil surface down into the rest of the soil. And so we're actually utilizing, some of the natural occurring temperature fluctuations that we get in the winter to our benefit in those circumstances. So as long as we don't have a whole lot of snow cover in those instances where we're making sure that the seed can get down to the ground, we're utilizing what we have in the winter to actually plant the seed. So, you can put seed out when we have some snow. The really big concern that we have is that, especially with those legume seeds that we're looking at, they're small, hard seed. And if we start getting some big snow melt, that's going to start clumping those up, as that snow melts and that water moves, it might move it off of your property. So you're just kind of wasting seed in those circumstances where you're going to just have clumps. You're not going to get good distribution, or it's going to move off your property into the ditch or your neighbor's pasture or wherever, and you're paying for seeding that area and not where you actually want it. So having a more open, field to work with is going to be ideal, especially from a frost seeding standpoint. When we're looking at something like feeding seed, that seed's going to be contained in a manure pat. And so the likelihood of it moving a little bit more is less. But again, we want to make sure that it gets down to the ground and that it's germinating on the ground, not sooner than, if that cow pat's on some manure or on a snow pile and it starts the germination process early for some reason and doesn't get roots established, that can affect things as well.
If you happen to notice within the division of labor on your operation that you seem to have a bit of free time through the winter months, this could be the most opportune time to take a good look at the prospect of interseeding. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.